Let's go on mute.
Hello everybody, we're just letting everyone in. We've got a lot of people booked this afternoon for this session, so please do bear with us a sec while we kind of just wait for people to come on in. If anybody feels like waving and saying hello, it's always nice to see everybody. This is the second session we've had today, so some of you I know, we were all looking at each other this morning. We have a lot more people though this afternoon. I'm just scrolling through. It's wonderful to see everybody as well. Oh, brilliant. So a few people waving who weren't there this morning, waving to say hello, which is always really, really nice. Just to let you know, we are recording this. If you're able to put your cameras on, that is always lovely, because then we get to see who's here. Yeah, as I say, we're expecting a lot of people this afternoon, which is wonderful. People from community-led housing hubs and also from local and regional strategic partners, which is absolutely wonderful. It's great to see you all. So we're still just letting people in. And a few people have said they like my background. I'm going to be honest, and it won't be any surprise. It's all lies. It's all fake.
What?
I know, you can't trust anything anymore, can you? It's all fake, I'm afraid to say. Just a few more people coming into the waiting room, and then I will be handing over to Catherine Harrington, one of the joint chief execs of the network, to take us through this session today. So a few people saying hello in the chat. That's always really nice. Please do say hello in the chat as you come in. It's always lovely to see who everybody is as well. If you feel like introducing yourself in the chat so that everybody knows who's on the call, that would be wonderful. So Catherine, I think we've hit a point where people have kind of stopped coming in en masse. So I think time to hand over to you, if we could, to kick off this event.
Wonderful, thanks Peg. Hi everyone, and welcome to the event Leading the Way, How Local and Regional Government Can Best Support Community-Led Housing. I'm Catherine Harrington, Co-Chief Executive of the National CLT Network. We're holding this event with Community-Led Homes, and as part of Power to Change's Homes in Community Hands programme, bit of a mouthful that. I'm delighted so many of you are here today. We actually are due to have over 200, which I think is incredible, and it shows the real interest in this and the relevance of this topic. Now, the case for new homes, including affordable housing, is all too well known. And of course, the coronavirus pandemic brought the need for not just more homes, but also better homes into sharp relief. Community-led housing, comprised of community land trusts, co-housing, cooperatives, and self-help housing, has been rising to the challenge. And we've seen significant growth, and especially in the last few years, partly because of the government's investment through the Community Housing Fund, but also because of the support of local and regional government. Just to illustrate that growth, 10 years ago, when it came to community land trusts, barely anyone had heard of them, and today there are now 350 across the country. There are 859 community-led housing groups of all types, including those 350 CLTs, active in all parts of the country. The number of homes in the pipeline has grown from 5,000 2 years ago to 23,000 today, of which 10,000 we know can be delivered in the next 5 years. And there are now 27 local enabler hubs who are here today, covering almost all of England and all of Wales. And they're providing that really important one-to-one support to groups to help them build homes. Whilst the community housing, I always say CHF, like I assume everyone knows what I mean. What I mean is, whilst the Community Housing Fund came to an end in March, and we've been campaigning for it to be renewed, we were obviously really disappointed to see that it wasn't mentioned in the spending review the other week. However, you might be interested to know that the Minister will be making a statement before Christmas, and there is a possibility that some support for community-led housing will be announced in that statement. So all I can say right now is watch that space between now and Christmas. Of course, many local authorities and combined authorities have long recognised the benefits of or the contribution that community housing can make to housing supply and regeneration, recognising how it builds homes that wouldn't otherwise be delivered, partly because groups are able to overcome local opposition to new development or are willing to develop on sites or take on assets that mainstream developers wouldn't go anywhere near, recognising how it contributes and supports economic recovery. Many of these projects are a vital source of contracts for SME builders, and they're able to keep them in business and thereby support local economies. Recognising how the sector helps diversify the house building industry because many of these groups themselves are therefore SMEs. And finally, recognising how the sector delivers value for money. In September, we commissioned, in fact, Capital Economics, renowned economists, to do a study on the value for money of community-led housing, using the same methodology that Treasury used, the Green Book, and they found that for every £1 invested, there's another £2.70 returned in terms of the positive impact on society. And because of those benefits, many local authorities have chosen, and combined authorities have chosen to support community-led housing in a number of innovative ways, as we'll hear about today, be that through disposing of land or assets at a price that makes it possible to develop affordable housing, providing grant funding or loan funding, even having staff dedicated to working on community-led housing, or actually directly supporting the local enabler hub. And because there are so many good examples of that support, it's actually really hard to single out some particularly shining ones, but that's what we've tried to do today. And we've tried to pick some from different local government structures. So we're going to hear the perspective of a combined authority, the perspective of a unitary, the perspective of two-tier authorities, and we're going to hear directly from directly elected mayors. So we're going to hear how each of them are supporting community-led housing, why they decided to support community-led housing, and how they're working with their local enabling hub. So I'm really delighted to be joined by such distinguished speakers. We have James Palmer, Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, via pre-recorded video. We have Marvin Rees, Mayor of Bristol City Council, also via pre-recorded video. We have Elaine Alford, Head of Housing Delivery at Bristol City Council. Cecilia Tredgett, currently housing consultant, currently working with the East of England Hub, and former Managing Director of the East of England LGA. And we have Mark Dickens, who is Lead Officer on Spatial Planning at Liverpool, sorry, I always get this wrong, Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. And then maybe you could give us a wave, guys. Wave. Lovely, thanks, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to hear from each of them, and then we're going to move on to have a 45-minute Q&A session. Before we get started, though, I'd like to hand over to Sophie, my colleague, to take us through some housekeeping things. Thanks, Sophie.
Hi, everyone. So I know we're all very used to Zoom now, but just so we're all on the same page, please use the speaker view instead of the gallery view, so you can only see who is speaking since we have so many people today. And just as a reminder, if you're on a computer, that will be in your top right corner where it says view. You can toggle between those. Please keep your video cameras on if possible. We chose to make this a Zoom meeting and not a Zoom webinar, so it could feel like a discussion because we're one movement working together. So we'd love to see you if it's possible, but we understand if your Wi-Fi is not strong enough. And please keep yourself on mute unless you've been invited to speak. Please don't be offended if I mute you if I can hear noises in your background. And as we already said, we'll be recording this meeting and we will circulate any presentations and the recording afterwards. And finally, please put your questions for the Q&A section in the chat. Thanks so much. Back to you, Catherine.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sophie. So at this point, this is when I would introduce James Palmer, if he was here in person, so to speak. But unfortunately, he couldn't join us at this time. So we asked Peg Alexander, one of our national hub managers, who is also...
We know we don't build enough houses, and we know that often when you want to build houses, people who already have houses don't want you to build houses. So there's a problem there that needs to be solved. So I'm of the view that over consultation is better than no consultation at all. And I'm also of the view that if you want to get things right, you bring the community along with you. So let me give you an example. of a site that I worked on that we delivered in Streatham in near Ely in Cambridgeshire. This site was developed in conjunction with the landowner, who happens to be one of the colleges, Peter House in Cambridge, and they were prepared to work alongside us for the long term to develop something exceptional. And what that meant was we used the uplift in the value of the land, partially for profit, partially to invest in the social housing element that's part of the community-led housing. So if you were to go on that site, it is open, there is loads of green space, it has a village feel, and you would not be able to tell the difference between the social housing and the market housing. But all of that was done in consultation with the local people. So initially, there was quite a lot of no, we don't want it, and then eventually it was really positive to the point that when there was extension to the site, the local people voted in favour. So there's benefit to the village for having high quality housing, village type housing on the edge of the village. There's benefit to the local school because some of the teachers live in it. There's benefit to the local economy because people aren't having to travel from away to come and work in the village or vice versa. So it's a really, really important tool in the toolbox, as I said, to bring forward housing.
How important is it that ideas people bring forward either match your manifesto, or are you, as a mayor, open to people lobbying, saying put community-led housing in your manifesto because it is going to be a way that you can help deliver overall? Well,
absolutely. Community-led housing is part of my manifesto. It was part of my manifesto. We've managed to bring forward another site not far from, or another two sites not far from the original one. What I was hoping is that this ambition would be embraced across the whole of Cambridgeshire, that you have different planning procedures, different planning authorities. Some are less open to change, some are less open to opportunity than others. I'm not a planner, so I don't have control over planning. What I do have is access to finance that government gave us that we can invest in community-led housing, often as a loan.
Did you have to negotiate that yourself, or was that part of the deal that the government offered you, or has that been an important part of your mayoral role, that you managed to get some of that finance in the devolution deal with government?
So we did a deal with government. I was then a leader of a council, one of the constituent councils that formed the combined authority, and part of that deal was a £100 million housing fund for Cambridgeshire. Now, we've used a portion of that money, around £60 million, for social housing, standard housing association housing, but we've taken 40 million and we've created a rolling fund. And that rolling fund means that we can invest into sites that bring a return. And community land trusts are sites that can bring a return. The biggest problem with any community land trust, and you'll know this, I'm sure, is getting it off the ground, getting it up and rolling. What in the industry they call the hockey stick of you need to invest before you get return. We can help with that as a combined authority through our rolling fund. And as community land trusts are built, we can then invest in the next one. So that rolling fund will be there for Cambridgeshire forever. It's not just for community land trusts. We're doing things like 100k houses for first-time buyers, and we're investing into sites where there's been derelict houses that can be done up, etc. But community land trusts are actually at the heart of it. But it frustrates me, and I don't know if you find this, Peg, but it frustrates me that people don't really understand what community-led housing is. And I think often politicians and certainly planning authorities shy away from it. Just getting it up and running does create that extra bit of bureaucracy and extra bit of hard work. But the dividends are exceptional.
I mean, you talked there as well about you've got the fund and also the getting it up and running. How important is the fact that you have got a local hub and you've got officers as well that help make that happen, because you've supported that as well, haven't you?
Yes, we have. So we've got a team that help get it off the ground. But it is very important that community-led means community-led. So it's very important that the community have the buy-in, and that's why trusts work. And that's so important if you want to make sure that, the houses in Streatham, that community-led trusts Streatham and Haddon and Wilburton and the other ones that we're building across Cambridgeshire, long after I'm dead and gone, and long after my children are dead and gone, those houses will still be available for working people to go into and have a start in life, or maybe live for their whole lives. And that was really what was at the heart of what we wanted to achieve. And community-led housing was the vehicle that allowed that ambition to be realised.
You've overseen community-led housing from the perspective of being a leader of a council, and now as being a mayor, is there added value? Is there extra that can come by getting a mayor and a combined authority behind the concept of community-led housing beyond just council leaders or council chief execs or directors of housing?
Yeah, because we tend to have finance. So that's the big difference. You can do this through district councils. Of course you can. We've done it. But it's finding that finance to do it at scale that's the problem. So one of the sites that we've got for a community land trust over at Streatham, which is not very far, my apologies, over at Kennet, which is not far from Newmarket, is a 100-acre site. So it's going to be a minimum of 500 houses. That kind of project needs about 20 to 30 million pounds to get it off the ground. That money will come back, don't get me wrong, it will come back. But that's, for a district council, that's a significant amount of money to find up front. So that's, what the combined authority brings to the table is a little bit more financial clout and the ability to invest early into schemes. And that's one that we haven't invested into yet, but we will be, I hope, early next year.
So very quickly then, just to finish, any advice that you would give to a hub who is thinking of approaching their mayor? What advice would you give them about how to go about that? What sort of things to talk about?
Well, I would say go and do it. Go and speak to a mayor, because all the mayors have got the same remit as me. They need to double the GVA of their area. It's about growing the economy. It's about creating housing, creating solutions around housing. And as I said, there isn't a silver bullet that's the solution to housing. It is a toolbox of multi-facets that can deliver what we need. So I would like to think any mayor in my position would be able to have open mind about what community-led housing can do. Now, not every mayor is in the position that I am in, that we've got almost unlimited countryside that we could develop sites on. That's, if you're mayor of Liverpool, your issues are slightly different. It's a different type of community-led housing. But there are mayors with rural areas, and I think they should be, and I think they probably would be open to new ways of thinking. So I would say get on the blower, get a meeting with your mayor and tell them what brilliant things community-led housing can do for communities. And if you want to take some examples, take the online for Streatham and Wilburton Community Land Trust, look at it online and show them what can be achieved, and I'm sure that they would be interested.
Fantastic. Thanks to Peg and to James. Really important what he was saying about the financial clout that combined authorities and mayors bring. Really lucky to the groups in that area to have such a champion, and obviously the 40 million revolving fund is going to be very important to those groups. And we're now going to hear about Bristol City Council and their flagship land disposal policy, which we're going to hear more about from Elaine in a moment. But we also wanted to talk to the mayor, or hear from the mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees. Now, like James, he couldn't actually join us at this time, but Peg got to speak to him as well. Over to Peg and Marvin.
Let's start off, Marvin Rees, by talking about your remit and role as the elected mayor of Bristol in relation to housing.
So, as a directly elected mayor, I take on a role of overall responsibility. Doesn't mean overall power. That's important to make a distinction. But for setting the direction and tone of Bristol, because it is directly elected by the population. Now I have actually taken those powers, that delegation of powers, directly into my own personal portfolio. So housing delivery is now with me.
Because you've had a target around housing. Tell us a bit about some of the things that you've been doing in housing, and particularly where this is community-led housing. So
we need to get numbers. We need to get houses delivered. So we wanted to release all the energy, really. And I suppose community-led housing, in many ways, is another source of that energy, isn't it? It's another driver of, or enabler of, delivery. And to ignore that as a source of homes, and not just homes, but communities, because we are clear, we don't just want to build units and slot people in them. We're trying to build communities because those are resilient, and not only is that social justice good, but it makes financial sense. More resilient communities are less expensive communities. For us, it's about really unlocking that energy. One of the things that I found before I was elected, actually, in a conversation with one of the main housing providers within the city, was that the blocker was in some sense a lack of political bravery and ambition and clarity. And I asked this person, who was very respected in housing in the city, what's holding Bristol back? He said it's political will. So when we came in, we knew that we had to evidence and facilitate political will.
And how important has it been that there is kind of quite a lot of community-led housing in Bristol? Certainly you've got the West of England Community-Led Homes Hub. They've worked out a potential 945 homes within the community-led housing pipeline, and they've already got 88 built at the moment. How important is that to you as a mayor, that you've got a hub and that you've got people who can do that work on the ground?
Well, that's important on a whole number of levels. One is, as I said, it's another source of delivery, delivering homes, and not just delivering homes, but building communities. And that has massive benefits for, like I said, for community building, not just in the product that you move into a home when you get a community, but in the process, people working together to build their community and taking ownership.
Right at the start, you talked there about more resilient communities and more empowered and more engaged communities. Are those the kind of arguments as a Labour politician that you would want to hear? And I'm thinking of other areas maybe where hubs need to go and talk to their mayors.
Absolutely. I think any city leader, local level politician would welcome people talking about building resilience into our cities or our towns or villages' futures. When people are coming up with the solutions to how we build coherent, resilient communities, mayors would be and leaders would be all ears. And I think that would cross any political party. I always encourage people as well to look at the Global Sustainable Development Goals. If communities could familiarize themselves with the SDGs and think, well, how can we build nature? How can we build good quality work? How can we build economic inclusion into our projects? Then they'll be very attractive.
Bristol does have a flagship policy. It has this land disposal policy. And I take it you would say that that policy that the council's got, which we're going to hear about in a minute, is actually a really important strategic policy for the city.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It is about housing, but it's also about the city culture. And, just as example, for me, the policy is actually administered at an officer level. It doesn't come across my desk and I, say yes or no. It's in the city system, and as we taste more and more the success and the opportunity and the benefits that come from it, it will get stronger. And
of course, the connections there with embedding social value right into those processes at municipal level.
Absolutely, housing is possibly the single most significant policy tool we have for improving a whole range of outcomes for people. From mental health, children's mental health, school attendance, economic prosperity, fuel poverty, food poverty. Houses are not just units, they are means to building a more just, more inclusive society. Listen, we want to work with people to help us become the city we aspire to be.
Thank you, Peg and Marvin. Really interesting what he had to say about more resilient communities being less expensive communities, and I'm sure many of you would agree with that, and also the importance of political will. I'd now like to invite Elaine Alford, who is Head of Housing Delivery at Bristol City Council, to tell us more about how the council is working with, or supporting community housing and working with the hub, and about the land disposal policy in particular. Elaine is a chartered architect by profession and has over 20 years experience working in the construction and housing sectors in the Southwest. Over to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Catherine. So community-led housing, what are the benefits? And why would a council like Bristol consider it? Well, there are substantial benefits to community-led housing. It enables local people to play a leading and lasting role in solving local housing problems, creating genuinely affordable homes, and builds resilience into that community. It's designed by local communities for local communities. That's really important. Community-led housing also empowers local people to be more self-reliant and gives residents a stronger voice in their own community, but also in the city or town that they live in. So is there a place for community-led housing within housing delivery? Absolutely, and Bristol sees that, and it is very supportive of it. It aligns with our corporate strategy and supports our fair and inclusive key commitments. So how did we get to where we are today? So the general background of it is, in about 2016, there were a few community groups in and around Bristol developing housing and looking to develop housing. So there were a few projects on the cards and a few projects that had been delivered, but there was a real appetite for the over 30 groups at the time to deliver housing and get involved in building in the city. I think we maybe have 40, 46 community groups now at the moment. So you can see there's a real appetite for it. So on the back of that, we held a visioning day with officers, politicians, community groups to assess the want and what the city could do to offer support to groups. So there were a variety of asks that came out of that workshop. One of them was that there was an acknowledgement by the city that community-led housing was valuable for the city and it could deliver. Another one was the requirement for a community-led land disposal policy. Land would be made available to support that policy. A hub to be set up to help support groups and mobilise them. An officer to work with the groups across the city to realise their aspirations, and funding being made available for development. So that's time, resources, money and land. That's a big ask. So what did Bristol do? They listened, the city listened. We worked with Homes England to secure funding for a community-led officer and to fund pre-development work associated with the first bid round of land disposal to community-led groups. And the same we did for self-builders. We reviewed our land holdings in the city to assess surplus and figure out if we had appropriate land to consider for release. And in 2018, we appointed a dedicated community-led housing manager. But we didn't stop there. We could have stopped there and said that was enough, but we didn't. On the 4th of February this year, Cabinet approved that community-led housing land disposal policy. The policy releases land specifically for community groups. Importantly, it incorporates the ability to recognise social value, the social value that is so important in community-led building. It allows those community groups to be able to acquire that land at affordable levels, and sometimes it's just £1, and to be able to provide that affordable housing. And in addition to the policy, we realised through listening to groups that there was some groups missing. So at the moment, the policy is being revised to extend the type of groups that can benefit from the policy. So that's happening now. So we're responding to those asks. So excitingly, recently, we released phase 1. We released 11 sites and we've had really strong bids from a range of community organisations seeking to deliver innovative and affordable housing models. We currently are working through those bids, so officers are assessing them, and hopefully in the very close to the new year or just after the new year, we can make announcements to the community groups that have been successful. To help move things along with funding, we have extended Bristol City Council's affordable housing grant eligibility to include housing organisations such as community land trusts, community-led housing organisations and specialist housing providers on the proviso that they are non-profit making organisations. And on the back of that, we are in receipt of our first application from a local community group for the provision of affordable housing. At the same time, on the 4th of February, the self-build land disposal policy was approved as well. This policy releases land specifically for people who want to build their own residence. Yes, it's different from community-led housing, but what it does demonstrate is Bristol is doing what it can to support development within local communities. So that's another stream of it. We've supported the setup of the West of England Housing Hub, and the hub is now established and has power to change funding for the next few years. So it's doing fantastic work. The hub recently secured funding for community groups across the city to enable pre-planning work on a number of community-led housing schemes. In terms of enabling learning and training, we've provided the Wordsworth Centre in Lochleys to help with learning and training for the sector and to provide a space for the first snug prototype home to be built. And in terms of what we do in housing delivery every day, well, community-led housing is firmly integrated within our housing enabling function. And we work across the teams in the council, so property to release the land, planning and highways to help community groups through the process so that they can get through that process easier with our support. So just to finish off, I have a few more examples of what Bristol City Council is doing to support community-led housing and communities to realise their aspirations. We've provided Bristol City Council land at nominal price for Sheldon Road, which is a development of 50 affordable rent and shared ownership houses in Lochleys, or units in Lochleys. This is being led by Bristol Community Land Trust and currently on site being self-finished by future occupants. Glencoyne Square, this is an exciting one. So this is our biggest community-led development. It offers 120 new homes, library, health centre. It is being delivered by Southmead Development Trust and ABRI. It's got planning consent. And this particular scheme is a housing scheme, but it has the potential to regenerate, or a first step in the regeneration of a whole of the Arnside area of Lochleys, or Southmead, sorry, in Bristol. And then at the other end of the scale, completely from Glencoyne Square, there's the We Can Make project, which is a pilot project of 16 microplots in the rear gardens of Bristol City Council's own housing stock in Knoll West. So this project will deliver affordable housing and employment and training for local people. And there's a huge amount of social value associated with this particular project. And as well as all that, we are now, the housing enabling team in my team are preparing information on phase 2 land release to community-led organisations. So that will be happening in the new year, which is really exciting. So Bristol has embraced community-led housing, and I hope you'll all agree with that. There have been a few bumps. It's not been totally plain sailing, and we're still facing challenges. So that's internal challenges and external challenges, but we're finding solutions and we're learning as we go. So we have been brave, we have taken risks, we've released land to community groups, and we've made funding available. And I can hand on heart say that Bristol has taken community-led housing seriously, and we have a real passion for it.
So much, Elaine. You should be really congratulated for that, for everything you're doing at Bristol. I think what's really interesting and inspiring is how you've worked really closely with the sector from the beginning and really heard and listened to them about what's needed, and that you continue to work closely with the hub and the groups now. I think that really is inspiring for many of us today. Thank you so much. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about the land disposal policy, especially when it comes to the Q&A. So I look forward to those. Now, I'd like to invite Cecilia Tredgett, who is an independent housing consultant, currently working with the East of England Hub, Eastern Community Homes. And she was formerly the managing director of the East of England LGA, and has worked in local government for a total of 37 years. Cecilia's going to bring the perspective from the East of England, and in particular, the perspective of two-tier authorities and unitaries without mayors. Thanks so much, Cecilia.
Hello, everybody. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully people can see this. Yes. Okay. Right. Well, hello, everyone. As Catherine said, I'm Cecilia Tredgett, and I'm very pleased to be here today representing Eastern Community Homes, which is the hub for the East of England. And we'll just spend the next 10 minutes giving you a perspective from the East of England, which is very different from what we've just heard from Bristol, which was inspirational. So here's the area covered by the East of England. It's made up of 50 councils, and it's predominantly two-tier councils with 5 county councils, 39 district councils and 6 unitary councils. There's no Mets or big conurbations in the east of England. And in the 20 years I've been working with the councils in the east, they generally work really well together, mainly in county areas and sub-regional areas, and also across the whole region. As you heard earlier, there's one combined authority with the mayor in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, that's James. But there's also 2 well-established, directly elected mayors in the cities or in Watford, but also in Bedford, over in the region. In terms of community-led housing in the East, we have far less examples than the rest of the East of England, despite being the home of the Garden City movement in Letchworth and Welwyn Garden City. But this lack of community activity, community-led housing activity, can, I think, be explained by a number of factors. Firstly, you know, the really high land values in the southeast make viability for affordable housing really difficult. Another factor was the uneven distribution of the government community-led housing funding that was given to councils in 2016 and 17. Only a handful of councils in the East got a share of the £9 million that was given, and places like Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire got absolutely nothing, practically. Now, this was down to the way that funding was calculated, as many of you will remember. It was based on, you know, the number of second homes that you had. Well, you know, many people struggle to afford one home in the east of England, let alone 2. So there's whole swathes of the east that didn't receive any of that money. So Eastern Community Homes, as I said, is the hub set up in response to this uneven picture. This new hub is backed by the local authorities in the East and the regional LGA, the East of England Local Government Association, and they're a partner. I've been working with the hub since I left Elga in March, and I've spent my first months talking to local authorities about community-led housing. Of the 30+ councils that I've spoken to, it's definitely not an absence of political support for community-led housing that's holding us back. Often it's, and James referred to it, a lack of awareness of the role that the councils can play, coupled with the challenges they have in delivering the government's growth agenda in the East. As you know, many councils are not only struggling with the pandemic, but also to make their local plans and build the number of affordable houses that the South East so desperately needs. However, the funding that was made available through the Community Housing Fund, combined with strong political leadership, means we do have a few fantastic examples, and happily many more in the pipeline. And I'm just going to tell you about 2 of them. So my first case study is the one on the left, which is Lavenham Community Land Trust, set up in 2017 and opened in 2020. This is a great example of 3-tier partnership working. So that's the parish, the district, and the county councils in Suffolk. But it's also a good example of how neighbourhood planning often provides the platform for community-led housing. The scheme is 18 affordable units for rent in Mid Suffolk District Council, and Suffolk County Council enabled the site, which was an old gritting store, so essentially a brownfield site. And the District Council provided the planning support. The other key partner, though, and not to be forgotten, is Hastow Housing Association, which is a specialist housing association with many years of working with rural communities in the south and east of England. Together, this trusted partnership supported the community to bring forward this really attractive scheme with very high environmental standards. The Community Land Trust own the scheme, but it's managed by Hastow Housing. And in fact, the Land Trust is now looking to build a further phase. The second example on the right is Marmalade Lane in Cambridge. This is an award-winning co-housing scheme, which again benefited from the leadership of a forward-thinking council, Cambridge City Council. This scheme took an awful long time to come to fruition, from about 2013, and eventually opened in 2018. The council and the group were inspired by a visit to Germany, actually, early on, to look at co-housing. And the scheme consists of 42 units, which are all for sale, as the high value of the land in Cambridge, despite best efforts, made renting unviable. The ownership is freehold and leasehold, and there is a large amount of shared communal space, including the house, which is the community living space and kitchen and guest accommodation, and the lane, which is the Carla's picture, the Carla's street pictured here, where children can play freely. Like Lavenham, this was built to exceptionally high design and environmental standards, and I have included a link to both schemes at the end of my presentation. So why should councils be supporting community-led housing? Well, I would argue there's never been a more important time to empower local communities and involve them in place shaping. The impact of the pandemic has brought many communities together in a way we never envisaged, and people quite rightly are more connected to their communities where they live. Also, however, that to deal with the homelessness crisis, we need to build more homes, 300,000 a year, the government believes. I think we can turn this challenge into an opportunity and involve local people in shaping their communities in practical ways, like designing and building homes together. Almost every council is struggling to meet its affordable housing unit targets, and community-led housing is one way they can increase this, both at a small scale, like rural exception sites, like the one at Lavenham, but why not on a scale, why not on a strategic scale as well, on strategic sites, or even more ambitious, using permitted development rights to help repurpose some of our high streets for affordable homes for local people. All of you who are here from local authorities today have self-build targets, and I know this varies across the country. Places like Hertfordshire have long lists, but very few opportunities to make them available, and community-led schemes could play a part in delivering these. A great example of this is the Graven Hill scheme in Oxfordshire, so out of our region, where the council and partners have made service plots with planning passports available to self-builders, and we'd really like to build on that example in the east of England. The case studies of Lavenham and Marmalade Lane are wonderful examples of high quality design, environmental sustainability, and innovative and progressive building techniques. And these contribute to our climate change targets. And another reason why local authorities should be supporting community-led housing, I believe. And finally, community-led housing doesn't stop at housing. The same communities want to take on community assets, set up small businesses, and this in turn will feed into the local economy. Before I finished, I just really wanted to tell you a little bit more about Eastern Community Homes and what local authorities, I believe, are looking for from their hubs. Most of you will be in areas where you already have a local community-led housing hub, or a new one is being set up. So I wanted to share our experience. By talking to our councils, we knew what the issues were, and we shaped the offer of support to them around these needs. The offer document, which is pictured here on the right and on our website, was sent out with a memorandum of understanding to all 50 leaders and chief execs by our partners, the East of England LGA. The offer covers these 4 key areas: raising awareness, sharing expertise, development of planning policy, and delivering technical advice and support to local councils and communities. As part of our offer, though, we also have an ask. And our ask is that each council pledges £3,000 to help us in our first 3 years. Importantly, both documents, both the offer document and the MOU, set out how we would meet the identified needs of the local authorities and the actions that we would take. And we're working very closely with the 6 rural councils in the east of England. And it's through those housing enablers that much of this work is going to be done. In the first 3 weeks, 6 councils have already signed up, and we're in discussions with many more. There's still a great deal to do in terms of setting up Eastern community homes. We want to build local authority networks in each county, and we want to put in place a housing association network as well, in order to take forward community-led housing in the region. So I will just leave you with some links that provide you with more information about Eastern community homes and the 2 case studies you will find on our website. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. I think it's really important what you mentioned at the beginning about the challenges local authorities are experiencing, especially with handling the pandemic, and that we really need to acknowledge those whilst also making the arguments that you really skillfully set out about how community-led housing can help local authorities. I also think it's great that you've set out a kind of ask and offer to local authorities, and I'd be really interested to hear how you get on with that. Now, thank you so much, Cecilia. I'd like to invite Mark Dickens, who is Lead Officer for Spatial Planning and the Land Commission, the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, to tell us about how the Combined Authority is supporting community-led housing, but especially on the current Land Commission. Mark has worked for a number of local authorities prior to joining Liverpool Combined Authority, including at St Helens, where he was Assistant Director of Regeneration. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. And I can't see you right now.
I'm here.
Okay, great. Hiya.
Hi.
Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I've been asked to answer sort of a couple of questions, so I just thought I would go through why are we as a city region supporting community housing. Firstly, the Liverpool City Region is 6 authorities. It's Knowsley, Holton, Liverpool, Sefton, St Helens and Wirral. So it's about 1.6 million people. I find it interesting when people are talking about the housing crisis. Up in this part of the country, we don't have so much of a housing crisis. It's not about new builds. It's not about the demand for new houses and meeting the 300,000. We surpassed the government's targets. What it is for quality of housing. We've got a lot of substandard housing and housing that is very low band in council tax and really, really poor in terms of insulation and quality. So our approach is slightly different. It's not about getting the numbers for the numbers' sake. It's about how do we get the quality housing. And I think that's exactly where we have the advantage of community-led housing. It's about the quality that comes through. I'm a planner. I apologise for that now, but my whole career has been spent with developers, mass house builders, building ubiquitous housing that can be anywhere in the country, that has no local identity. My view is community housing is unique. It is locally designed housing for local people that is influenced by local people, and it's bringing back that localism. So that's really important to me personally. Also, a lot of the sites deal with, a lot of those sites are in our key neighbourhoods, in those areas that we need to have some development. And then what happens is not only is the design better, but you tend to use local architects, local builders, local community people. It's about engendering and keeping that local finance locally. How many mass house builders get some money, build the houses, sell them and leave? All that funding that's generated is no longer in that community. So this to me is more about that community, and it's the community bit that's important to me, as well as the housing, but maybe the community a bit more. Our Land Commission, I think that's why I've been probably asked it. It's still early days, I will say that. We haven't had the final report. As part of our devolution deal, the Metro Mayor, Steve Rotherham, was given the powers to set up a Land Commission. And when I went upstairs, because it sits under planning, and had a good old chat with him, the first thing he told me in no uncertain terms, I'm not having the usual, it's not about numbers, it's not about just getting stuff built, this is about how do we actually embed it. He has a mantra, no neighbourhood left behind. So it's about how do we actually get neighbourhood get the neighbourhood to benefit. So what we did, we've pulled together, and we've got Brit, who's is at this conference. She's on the Land Commission. We've got an organisation called CLES, Centre for Local Economic Strategy, I think, and Do Tank, as they call themselves. They lead on our local on our Land Commission, and we deliberately have got no combined authority or local authority representation on there, because we wanted it to actually come from people who think about this. And so it's a big think piece, I suppose, if you want to call it. And it's talk about land assets. We have to be blunt, as has been pointed out, local authorities haven't got a huge amount of cash. They've been really hammered by COVID, austerity. I know I spent most of my time in local authority cutting services back, unfortunately. So there are certain sites that are going to be sold for housing to get capital receipts, but there are lots of sites that have not a huge value. So why can't we embed those in the local community and get, it doesn't have to be housing, it's also employment. So on our Land Commission, it is about how can we use public sector assets and private sector assets to benefit the community. So there will be housing, there'll be workspaces, and the 14 participants or advisors we have are going to come up with a report that's going to be finished at the end of the year. This is about embedding community wealth building, as we've called it, or social value. And it's going to be across the piece. It's not just about land assets. It's going to be about how do we influence the combined authorities social value framework? How do we infuse the community wealth building framework? So that's it. How can we work the local hub? I'll hold my hands up at the moment. We haven't done. If one thing that this conference has done is introduce me to Paul virtually. So I've already made contact, Paul's already made contact with me, so we will take that further with Brit, and I'm happy to take advice. So that's my little bit. I'll finish now. Happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic, Mark, and I'm very pleased that this conference has meant that you've now got contact with Paul. Really, thank you also for bringing the perspective of where it's not about just new homes, but it's about quality. We needed that. And also really interesting what you say about the Land Commission not being populated with people from the authorities, but actually from people like Brett and others who are doing things on the ground, which is fantastic. Looking forward to hearing more. Thank you so much to all our fantastic speakers for such inspiring and informative talks. I hope many of you now can think of so many ways in which, if you're in a local authority, you can support community and housing, or if you're in a hub, things you can be saying to your local and combined authorities. We have just over half an hour for Q&A, and I know there's so many of us that there are probably lots of questions. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Tom Chance, to do the Q&A. Thank you again.
Thanks, Catherine. Well, there were some questions already firing away in the chat, and if you've got more questions that have come up, then please pop them in the chat and we'll try to bring you in. There were a few questions going right back to Elaine's talk on the Bristol land policy, a few questions about how that works, in particular Rebecca Lockwood asking about the conflict of the city providing the land for community-led housing versus its own housing. And we know that Bristol City Council obviously has an ambition to deliver housing directly as well as with community-led housing. And also from James Newton asking about the bidding process and where you end up with groups in competition with one another. And some people put some stuff into the chat box answering that a bit, but I wonder, Elaine, if we could come back to you and talk about how do you see this policy working and resolving those different conflicts? Because there's limited land in Bristol and an awful lot of demand for it.
I agree, there is an awful lot of demand, but how do we deal with the conflict? We try and balance it out. We have our own HRA, Direct Council Home Delivery Programme. We do that. We have an arm's length delivery company as well called Gorham Homes. We also employ them to deliver. We work with RPs. We have a huge housing enabling team to work with RPs. We have a grant funding programme. We are actively working on land, de-risking it for either outline for our own direct delivery or to release to RPs through market. We sometimes release land to private developers as well. So we don't see development as only one stream. We try and balance it all. So in terms of the community land sites, we look at sites between sort of 3 and 10 usually. Sometimes we'll go up to 15. And we'll look at those, and those would be the ones that will be earmarked for community-led housing generally. Ones smaller than that will go to self-builders. And then once you start getting over the sort of 15 mark, we tend to look at our own HRA delivery programme. Then we'll look at RPs, and on the very big sites, we'll look at Gorham Homes. So we are balancing that competition and that risk, but we have ways of satisfying the whole remit of housing delivery, and it's better to spread the wealth and spread the delivery than put all our eggs in one basket, and that's what we've done in Bristol.
Thanks, Elaine. And Susan Cataldi from Bristol has helpfully put a link into the chat box to the policy if anyone wants to read it. So I wanted to come back on, you mentioned, Elaine, about the sort of different sizes and the rationale as to when they go to those different options. We know obviously that in Bristol and elsewhere in the country, there are some quite large scale community-led housing schemes as well. So you've got Southmead, which is significantly larger than your kind of pocket of community-led housing in your policy. And we heard from James Palmer at the start about Kennet in East Cambridgeshire, which is a garden village of 500 homes plus. Have you looked at ways in which you could use your land for those sorts of larger scale community-led housing projects or partnerships? Because somebody also mentioned your Gorham developer working in partnership with other providers. Is that something you're looking at?
We're always looking at new ways of doing things, but this land disposal policy it's in its infancy at the minute. We just literally got it over the line. So the aspiration is to work with that policy and test it and push it and squeeze it and see what else we can do. And as sites come up and as people come and talk to us about that site or that other site or over there, then we will have those discussions. But at the moment, the policy and releasing land to that policy tends to be around those smaller 3 to 10, 3 to 15 size sites. Southmead is special. Southmead was brought to us by the community on a piece of green space that was doing nothing. It was just green space. It wasn't a park. It has a footpath through the middle. The community approached Bristol about a community-led project. And so working with Southmead Development Trust and ABRI, that project has been born out of that. It's out of that hunger by the community for something better. And I think it will spark off or it has the possibility of sparking off a whole regeneration for the area, which is really exciting.
Great, thank you, Elaine. We also had a question from Britt, which I wonder if I could also bring in Cecilia here. Sadly, Mark has had to leave us, but Cecilia might want to comment on this, and maybe also Emily Mulvaney, who's stepping in for the combined authority in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Maybe all three of you might want to pick up on what Britt's question about asset locks. So Britt, over to you.
Yeah, I just have a question. I really, it's such an exciting example for us, the land disposal policy, and we've been introducing that also in the Liverpool City Region Land Commission as a great example. I think something that we talked and thought a lot about was, it is of course in all of our interest that public land, we have lost so much public land over the last decades, that land doesn't get lost in this process. So I guess the question here would be, how do we secure in this process that land passed on can then not be sold on? So that was my question about it going into organisations with an asset lock, and if that is something you consider in your bidding process.
Shall I jump straight in? That is something that was well considered. We don't want to give land to community groups or any groups, and then all of a sudden they flip it, and before you know it, it's on the market, and some developer is putting up big expensive homes at the expense of the local community. That is not what our policy is about, and we have those safety mechanisms in the policy to make sure that it is protected, and it delivers affordable homes in perpetuity. So yes, we have considered that and put those measures in place.
Thanks. Cecilia, I wonder if you have any comments on this across the East Anglia, the conversations you've had with all these different authorities, what they've looked at in terms of land disposal. Obviously, what land they own will vary a lot around the region, I imagine.
I mean, I think it was very interesting to hear what's happening in Bristol in particular. And I just think that there is no common view across the east of England. I think one of the biggest issues that we have is that land is so scarce, and that councils across the east of England, quite rightly, those that do have those assets are often looking for best consideration from them. And it's really tough to be able to demonstrate that social value that Bristol have managed to do so well. Having said that, there are some great examples in Suffolk again, where one of the features of two-tier local authorities, those of you that work in rural areas will know, are the old, what we call county farmland. A lot of our counties were once farm owners, and they still have quite a lot of land. And Suffolk has been very good at disposing of small parts of their land for community-led housing. But in terms of the mechanisms, there is no single way across the east of England that I feel has gained acceptance. But Emily from the Combined Authority will probably be is the most advanced in terms of having those discussions within the Combined Authority, and many of us are looking to them to see what they will be doing, as it will hopefully provide a model for us in a more rural setting. So I'll let Emily come in.
Thanks, Celia. Yeah, I think just to reiterate what Cecilia has said, because land prices are so high in the Cambridgeshire area and land is so scarce, it's not just the local authority that's concerned about losing those assets in the longer term. It's actually also a huge concern for the communities themselves, and they are very driven by the ability to maintain community assets in perpetuity. So being able to hold land and buildings in a body like a community land trust is something that both the local authorities and communities really support, as you do have that statutory asset lock. And logistically, we tend to do it via Section 106 in Cambridgeshire. A lot of the land is rural exception sites, so we have Section 106 on the land that protects that in perpetuity, and it's also set out in all of the community land trust governing documents. So you have the statutory asset lock, and then also governance arrangements for if the CLT were ever to dissolve itself or anything like that. So that's how we're safeguarding it in Cambridgeshire at the moment.
Thank you. And do you think, Cecilia or Emily, that examples like Bristol's are of interest, you know, the policy specifically? I think you described, Cecilia, wanting to get more of a network of local authorities across the region to talk to one another and learn from one another about doing disposals. And I think the National CLT Network, we'd say that Bristol's is one of the most advanced policies in terms of thinking through how you achieve best consideration in line with social value.
Yes, I mean, I was writing down, I certainly, wrote down Bristol equals Norwich. I think it's our cities like that, our bigger cities that would be able, with the same sort of political ambition, if I'm honest, are more likely to be able to do that. But they do also have an elected mayor in Bristol, which, has a certain advantage as well, which obviously Bristol doesn't, Norwich doesn't, and it's smaller. But the local authority network that we've set up in the east of England is already sharing a lot of that really good practice. It's early days, but I think we have a good network. But I think we can learn more from some of the national examples because they are further ahead than we are.
Thank you. Jo Lavis anticipated Emily mentioning Section 106 and other means of trying to protect some of the benefits that are being delivered. So Jo, if I could bring you in to bring up your question about that, and maybe also planning white paper or right to buy, wherever you want to take that question.
It was really just to explore what other mechanisms there were there, and to understand the ones that Bristol were using. And because there are, Section 106 can be used, but it has its limitations, and it may not be there for that use after the planning white paper, we just don't know. And I think it was about what other mechanisms we could use or could push for. So there's one which is already used sometimes in terms of putting something, a covenant, into the deed of sale. And then that reminded me that Scotland, of course, have this much more forward-thinking legislation in terms of community right to buy. Tom, please don't ask me to go into the detail right now, because I haven't got it at my fingertips. But I just think it's something which would be really worth exploring and pushing. And even if we can't use that legislation, are there things in some of the mechanisms which support its implementation that we could use?
Thank you, Jo. I'm particularly interested in whether any of our three panel have any views on this, because in a way you're all looking to proactively bring opportunities forward anyway, and some would describe the sort of community buyout powers as sometimes putting people in opposition to public landowners as opposed to working with them. I don't think it needs to be that way at all. So I wonder if Elaine or Cecilia or Emily have any comments or thoughts on what Jo just said. You're all ducking out.
I've unmuted. So I think we have to be thinking, maybe particularly in the East, where land values are so high, we need to be thinking more strategically. I think for me, community-led housing, it has to be bottom up, but actually the role that we can play as local authorities is our enabling policy remit that we have. And so I suppose I'm thinking of working at a very strategic level. So we've got, for example, the Cambridge to Oxford arc, or the Oxford to Cambridge arc, depending on where you are, which is a massive, I think it's 27 different councils. But where does community-led housing sit within that? How can we ensure that the policymakers right now are starting to think about enabling sites for community-led housing to provide that really vital community anchor? Because actually, the alternative to that is that that communities will feel left behind and be in opposition to all the growth that they're going to experience on the doorstep. So I think there's a real opportunity now at this stage where we, and particularly in the southeast, I'm sorry, it's different in the north, but in the southeast, the issue is the growth agenda and how we as local authorities help manage that growth agenda, so that growth just doesn't happen to people, but we as as the democratic voice ensure that they do get a say in how that place is shaped. So for me, yes, it's about particular policies, Section 106, whatever we can use, the community right to own, but also how can we work at a much more strategic level to ensure that we're making the most of the opportunities out there in the next 20 to 30 years, because that's when those sites will be built out, and each and every one of them should have community-led housing as its cornerstone in order to make it sustainable and a great place to live. So it's a bit of a different view rather than policy. It is about strategic policy and commitment to doing things at scale.
Thanks. I really welcome that vision of community-led housing being knitted through the whole way that the planning and housing happens in the region, as opposed to communities having to sort of fight their corner to get a rare opportunity to do something. So I've got a few more questions queued up to take us around the country a bit. I'm going to go from, first of all, to Abby Ryan from the West Midlands, and then Ben Clay from Manchester, and then Rhiannon Martinson from the West of England. So if we start with Abby.
Thanks, Tom.
I have a question about for where sort of combined authorities particularly are looking to invest in schemes potentially, what are the key things that they want to see in business cases from community-led housing groups and projects, and what really makes a scheme an investable proposition for them?
Okay, thanks, Abby. I'll take a few questions and then put them to the panel. And if others hearing these questions, if you have something to contribute or something you think you could add to it, then pop it in the chat and I'll see if I can bring you in. So Ben from Manchester next.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so what I'm interested in really, obviously we've heard about some of the added value with community-led housing, and I think we'd all support it. But obviously there's a lot of pressure to deliver homes as fast as possible, to deliver affordable homes and social rent homes and stuff. And the difficulty, I guess, with these schemes is that they might perhaps wrongly be seen as requiring a lot more work and investment and time and resources in terms of community development work and stuff like that. So I'd be interested as to what sort of resources and support people can access. Obviously, we have the hub in Greater Manchester, but as an organisation, what kind of help can you give to assist local groups that would like to pursue community-led housing, and how to develop from a kind of an aspiration to something that's got a realistic chance of being funded and supported by a council?
Thanks, Ben. That's a really, really useful and important question. And Rhiannon from West of England Hub.
Hi, Tom. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me to speak. I just had a question for Elaine, really. It's really inspiring to hear that everybody feels that the land disposal in Bristol that I've worked so closely alongside Bristol City Council on has been so innovative and inspiring. And there's a huge appetite nationally to kind of replicate that. It's something we're keen to do more locally, and I just wanted to kind of say formally to Elaine, we're already kind of starting to talk about this anyway, but we'd like to kind of start doing that more within our region and start a bit of a dialogue with the local authorities that we have here. I noticed some of them were here, but it looks like they may have dipped out, but it'd be great to start that process.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so Abby asked about what the combined authorities want to receive in terms of an investment case or a business case from groups. And I wonder, Emily, if you could start by answering that, and maybe also if you've got any comments on Ben's point about the resources for community development for groups to bring things forward, because of course you've also worked with groups directly as well. And how do you kind of marry that up, what becomes a business case, but before that, the work you need to get a group to the point where it can present that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll actually start with the second question. Although I am embedded within the combined authority and obviously spend a lot of time meeting with local authorities and combined authority boards and things like that, the day-to-day work of my job is still directly on the ground with groups. And meeting with groups, going to trustee meetings, assisting them in developing business plans, financial plans, things like that. And I think that is really a vital role. And I think if there's anyone within your organisation, either a housing enabler, a community-led housing advisor, and a housing officer, that can act as kind of a conduit between the community-led housing group and kind of the more strategic officers at local authority level, that is an absolutely vital role, kind of someone that knows the intricacies of local government and when is the right time to be getting involved in the various planning and housing structures and who those right people are to be talking to. That's vital to make sure that you are building up a kind of business plan and things like that have a chance of being successful. So then to go on to what makes a community-led housing group investable to us as a combined authority, what we're really looking for is additionality. So enabling a scheme to come forward and provide additional affordable homes that would not otherwise be provided. And then kind of a bonus to that is any community benefits, community facilities. We're really looking for schemes that are markedly more beneficial to the local community than a kind of more standard private development. And that goes into kind of anything to do with energy efficiency or anything like that as well. We want to see evidence of genuine community-led development of the scheme. So we want to see how that scheme has been changed as a result of community feedback, not necessarily just that you've done that community engagement, but how did that actually change the scheme? Where can we see that actually fed into the scheme? And then obviously the probably most important thing is a viable business plan. So we need to know that this scheme isn't going to go bankrupt in 5 years' time, that it will provide affordable housing in perpetuity for local people, and that the governance and financial structures are there to make that successful. But then working with your enabler or your community-led housing advisor or whoever that is, they will make sure that you're having those conversations with the local authority. And if there are areas that the local authority or the combined authority are going to take issue with, it's flagged very early on in the process and you have chance to flex with that.
Thanks, Emily. I suppose some of the points you made throughout there, particularly around the issue of local support, follow from what we heard from James Palmer in his talk earlier, that being one of the key considerations that the combined authorities are looking for. And I presume in other parts of the country, so having heard from Mark in Liverpool, that you'd have slightly different objectives that you'd be looking to address. So probably the starting point is looking at what those combined authorities' objectives are, and then as you described, kind of being able to address those in the way that you present the business case for the group. Elaine and Cecilia, do you have anything to add on both looking at what combined authorities want and how best to engage with combined authorities? Obviously, I know neither of you are directly involved in one. And also this point from Brian about the resources for community development. And maybe Elaine also, if you want to pick up finally anything about what Rhiannon was saying about beginning that conversation.
I'll start with the resources. So Bristol put a specific officer, that community-led manager, in place, and I know Kelly's on the call. I'd just like to say that without someone as strong as Kelly pushing that, it quite often can fall flat in its face. You need a strong officer that is willing to engage outside the authority, but also push inside. And without that full support of people above, again, the officer and the policy can fall flat in its face. And we have worked hard to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that the mayor is behind community-led housing, and therefore that is filtered down to the officers and all the way through the organisation, and therefore it will be a success. In terms of what we look for, well, we try and get social value out of absolutely every bit of development we instigate through Bristol City Council, and we have a social value calculator that goes out with every tender. And so in terms of the bids that community groups submit to us, we look at the housing proposal, we look at the delivery mechanism, we also look at the social value aspects, and that's a really big part of it. We look at any community benefit and also the viability. So once we score, and there's a panel of people we've put in place, that some are connected to housing delivery and some aren't, so some are legal and property. So they score that, and once that panel has scored it, then those recommendations are put further on up the chain and decisions are made. So there's lots of things that happen and have to happen, and lots of fail safes you need in place so that there's no one point of failure. But we've learned those lessons, and to be fair, we're still learning them. There are still pitfalls and bumps along the road, but it is a really good thing to do. And community engagement can be difficult because you're dealing with people, and that's difficult. But if you do it proactively and you do it positively, you want to engage with them because you have a shared vision, then that shared vision will be the thing that is the benefit the local authority gets.
So yes, just following on really from what Elaine said, I think the local authorities that have got their own resources just like Kelly in Bristol, you know, it makes an enormous difference. And in some ways, I think, going back to the point I made in my presentation, why there is this uneven distribution in the East is that those councils that receive community housing funding, most of them employed officers to actually support this process, and that accelerated the delivery of community-led housing. So I think that's important, along with the other point I think that Elaine's made really, which is the leadership point, that this needs to have the leadership of both at all levels of local government in the East of England, all three tiers need to be on board with that. But I suppose the other point that I would make is how I see the hubs making a difference in the future, because for me, the hubs have to be almost a one-stop shop for everybody. So I think they can be a place where that experience can be either bought or borrowed from. And certainly in the hub in the East of England, we've set up a bank of technical advisors, many of whom are being accredited by a national training course that's running at the moment, to prepare them for the, I hope, the rush of new schemes that come forward in the future. Because I think there is that need for almost cradle to grave support with community-led housing. And the sorts of people that we need to do that are really special people as well. They're people that really do understand local authorities, they understand the political environment, but they also are good community advocates and community development officers. So the hubs can make a real difference, I believe, by providing that resource at all levels. And then I suppose the final thing that could speed things up in some areas would be housing associations that are like Hastow Housing Association, that have that value system, which is around rural community housing. And unfortunately, there just aren't enough of those now. And so I do think there is a question out there for the housing association movement, how they can get behind this too, in order to promote more community-led housing, but help us accelerate it too, because much of the development capacity, particularly in the East of England, is locked into housing associations. And so we need to tap into that better in order to help communities if that's the path they choose to go down.
Thanks, Cecilia. I wonder, it's interesting you're raising the point several times about the first round of Community Housing Fund money, that 60 million that got sent out to 148 local authorities, and whether there's anything that we could be doing more effectively as the community-led housing sector, working with local governments to make the case to the government nationally about the need for this funding to continue. So we know we've been pressing the case for Community Housing Fund generally, and that provided funding both to groups and to the enabling hubs and the kind of training program like the sector infrastructure side of things. But there was also that element of funding available to local authorities, which is currently closed as well. So maybe that's something we should be picking up there. Just looking if there are any final questions on the chat. I don't think so, just some interesting comments. You're mentioning housing associations tees up nicely a little advert for a session we're doing on Thursday at 10 AM. So we're launching, as community-led homes, an updated guide on housing association partnerships with community-led housing. With Place Shape, it's being hosted by Place Shapers. The guide has been endorsed by them and by the National Housing Federation, the Rural Housing Alliance, and the Housing Association Charitable Trust. And we'll hear from myself, I'm afraid, along with somebody from United Communities, so more Bristol case studies, and also from Carbon Homes, talking about their support for community-led housing in the North East. If you're interested in that, we'll make sure that you get a link sent around after this event session. We're also going to be sending around some other links to useful guidance that you may not be aware of. So there's first of all, some useful guidance for local authorities in the form of a toolkit, which was put together by HACT some years ago. There's a very detailed planning guidance document, which Joe Lavis produced for Community First Yorkshire. And there was a study done some years back by the Cooperative Council's Innovation Network. So there's 3 really key publications there that you may find useful. We'll also be sending details of a network for local authority officers, which was set up by our partner, the CCH, the cooperative, acronyms go out of my head. Our sister organisation for co-ops, the Confederation of Cooperative Housing. So as part of the Community-Led Homes Programme, if you're working in a local authority and you want to be in a part of a network just of other local authority officers to talk to each other about practical questions, you might also be interested in joining that. We'll see as well, I'm going to say we see, as I'm making this commitment on behalf of Sophie, that we'll see if we can mop up any other links and other useful info in the chat and put that into the email too. So those of you who missed the link to Bristol's policy, we'll see what we can do about also the social value stuff. So I think I'm going to draw it to a close there. And thank you very much to Cecilia, to Elaine, to Emily, to Peg for doing the interviews with Mark and Marvin, Mark who's now left, and all of you for your questions and comments and chat. It's been really, really useful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That was great. Sorry.
I am.